Hi everyone, I'm Hales and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you the whole process of how I've made my latest coat, from the very beginning of cutting out the paper pattern, alterations and fit issues I've had along the way, right through until the finished coat. So if that's something that you are interested to find out more, then please stick with it. I am using a Vogue pattern, which is classed as a very easy Vogue for a blazer, V9133, and I'm making this view here, view C. I'm adding a lining to it and using wool coating fabric to make it a bit warmer and more of a coat rather than a casual jacket. It's quite generous in its size, but it means that I can wear big bulky jumpers underneath it and it's perfect for the cold weather. So grab a cuppa and some snacks and I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, please hit that subscribe button and the like button if you haven't already done so. So thank you for watching and here we go. To start with, I iron the tissue pattern pieces to help them sit flat for when I put them on my fabric, and it makes cutting out a lot easier. Also, to avoid tracing a pattern, I just snip into the different seam lines of the size that I want, and then I fold back so I make sure that I've got the size that I want, and then just tape it in place. The tape can easily be undone if you need to cut a bigger size, and it's just a shortcut to avoid tracing out, and it's Scotch tape that I use here. So when you flip it over, everything stays in place. Next, I'm pinning the dart just so I can see how it's going to lie on me and for a rough fit on what it looks like. And from here, I decided that it's not sitting on my natural waist, so I've taken an inch out of it. So just fold over and then tape that in place. Now, if you're taking any length out of the bodice, you need to make sure that you do it to the corresponding facing pieces, and of course all the back pieces as well, otherwise one side is going to be longer than the other. I like to use stones as pattern weights rather than pinning. It makes things a lot quicker for cutting out. This is actually going to be the rough fit, so a toile or a muslin depending where you're from, and I'm just using some curtain fabric here, which just gives it a good, it's quite stiff so it's good for a coat. This one I'm measuring the width of the sleeve minus the seam allowance just as a rough guide to see if that will fit me, especially over my jumper. Now, as a heads up for later on in the video, I do need to make an adjustment on this because although this looks like it fits, it's actually worthwhile making the actual garment up, even if you just make one sleeve so you can see how it fits. There is a dart on this sleeve, so I'm just mark that in. I'm just using a biro and a ruler because this isn't my main fabric, so I know where I need to sew for that. Next on, I'm going to mark the darts on the front pieces and on the facing pieces as well for the same reason, just drawing those straight in, but I wouldn't be doing that on my proper fabric. So here you'll see that I'm marking all darts and sewing all the darts as well. Then obviously they would need to be pressed, but when I make a muslin, I don't bother doing that. I just skip that stage. It's just a rough guide to see how everything's going to fit. And the back is then attached to the front, and the front facing has a dart which then goes into the seam. So you join them together at the front, which makes the facing a loop, because this is how the collar is formed on this particular pattern, and then you sew them together as one big seam. Next up are the sleeves. I've done the gathering stitches and just seeing here, and it is too tight. It's barely going over on my bicep, it's barely going over that jumper, so I definitely need to make an alteration on that one. I realised that I need to do a full bicep adjustment, and so that will add the width that I actually need. So I start off by drawing a line down the centre of the sleeve with the length and cutting up there right to the top, nearly at the top, but you're stopping at this when you get to the seam allowance. You then need to do a horizontal line going across the widest part of the sleeve at the top, and again stopping when you get to the seam allowance on both sides of the sleeve. This can then help you to manipulate the pattern pieces in order to gain width to the sleeve. So I'm going to put some paper underneath it so you can see, and it doesn't alter the shape of the sleeve head. Morning, I thought I would just get on here. This is the next day. I have dyed my hair this morning, so it's wet. So excuse that, and you may find some hair dye on my face. I thought I would just show you what it looks like, what the jacket looks like on. I've only done a toile of, or a muslin of, obviously one sleeve as you can see, and I have very roughly done a facing, just so I can see how the collar pops out. So just tucking that in. This is actually made out of my parents' old curtains that my dad gave me a couple of weeks ago. So, and it's quite stiff fabric, which is good for when you have a coat or a jacket. So the lapels will sit here. As you can see, it doesn't have a separate collar as such that you put in. It's like an all-in-one facing that goes around the back, and that the facing forms the collar. So that's quite a nice detail actually. So I'll just show you. I might just need to adjust the camera so you can see the length, because I'm not sure whether to shorten this. I have already shortened this by 1 inch at the waist, just to raise the waist up so it sits on my natural waist, because that's an alteration I do quite often, especially with the big 4 patterns. Now the sleeve was too tight when I cut it, so I did split it, the pattern piece, all the way down, which you would have probably seen in some footage I put on from yesterday. So I split it all the way down and then just opened it out to allow for more room, and then I hoped that by doing that it wouldn't mess with the sleeve head, that it wouldn't be adding too much. But it was quite a lot of fabric to get into the armhole when you're not supposed, it should just fit in, because I'm adding width here and not here. But there's a lot more room in it, and I feel that because I'm going to add a lining, that is just about the right size. I need to adjust my pattern pieces because it's sort of one side of the sleeve came out longer than the other. So if I tuck it up, so there'll be like 1 inch hem. Yeah, I think that's good. But I just wanted to really come on here and show you why I'm doing why I'm going to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. Because if you look, now I've got the sleeve on, it's just drooping down, and that isn't where my shoulders are. So I think I need to take 1 inch out. So if I just pinch it slightly, you'll see that that is sitting so much better it's actually on my shoulder. If I get closely. So by taking like 1 inch out, that just brings it up, because that's where it currently is. It's like sloping there, but my shoulder is up here. So yeah, and I'll take 1 inch out. Let me just pan the camera down so I can show you the length. This is probably going to chop my head off. Here, so. Oh, and while I've got really good light in the conservatory this morning, I thought I would show you what fabric I've got, because this is obviously not the fabric I'm going to make a coat out of. This is fabric given to me by Minerva Crafts in exchange for a blog post, and I chose coating fabric because I knew I wanted to make a coat. So I bought the pattern myself, and the interfacing and the thread and everything, that all the notions and things I have bought, but I did get the fabric for free, obviously in exchange for that, so just so you know. So it's a Lady McElroy wool coating fabric, and it's hard to see, but there's very small metallic-y lines of thread running through it. And I just thought, yeah, I'll just try that and make a coat for winter. I'm now going to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. So I'm going to find the seam allowance and mark it on the pattern. So I'm marking it here at the shoulder seam, and then also just marking at the armhole as well, because you're not going to cut through those pieces through the seam allowance. Then you need to measure the armhole, and you want to find 1/3 of the way down of the armhole. So I think roughly on this pattern it's for about 2 inches or so. So put a mark where the 1/3 of the armhole is, and then you want to go halfway through the shoulder seam. So you do a quick measure, find the halfway point, and then you're going to draw a line from the shoulder seam going to the mark you've just made on the armhole. Then you want to go and make a line through the point where the shoulder meets the armhole through to the line that you've just done. So you've made a triangle. You're going to then cut it, but you're not going to cut all the way through and completely chop it off. So you start off from the shoulder seam, and you're going to cut through until you get to the seam allowance, and then you're going to do the same again, cutting through the bottom of basically the triangle up to the seam allowance. So don't cut through it, because it acts as a hinge. These pieces can then be overlapped, and that's where you want to take excess out. But obviously if you were wanted to make them wider, then you would expand it. But this one's the narrow shoulder adjustment, and I want to take 1 inch out of the pattern piece. So I'm going to overlap each piece by 1/2 inch, which will then remove 1 inch from the shoulder seam. This should not affect the armhole at all because that stays the same. You're not making it longer or anything like that. So where the pattern spreads out, that is where the extra bit is taken, and so you should still have the same shape of the shoulder. To prepare my fabric, because I'm using wool coating, I'm still giving it a good steam with the iron because I can't machine wash it like you'd normally do to pre-treat your fabric. So I'm just giving it a steam just to stretch anything out before I start cutting it out. And then I'm back onto the cutting table again, aka the dining room, along with my pattern weights, and now I'm cutting out all the pieces and also all of the facings and interfacing. And I'm using Horsehair canvas, which is a tailoring canvas. It's not a fusible interfacing, so it does have to be hand sewn, and it's quite thick, so I'm cutting away all the seam allowances just to reduce bulk, so it doesn't make all the darts and everything too thick, and it will lay nice and flat. And here you'll see, this is, I think the technique is called pad stitching. It's how you attach the horsehair canvas to the main fabric, and you literally catch one tiny thread so you can't see it from the outside, and then you just run down on the inside. So from the outside it's one small stitch and that's it. This is the piece from the back facing, and I've also done the narrow shoulder adjustment on that, and I've just marking my darts on the piece. And I've also realised that I haven't cut out the seam allowances on the dart on this piece, so I've marked with chalk which is the right side and which is the wrong side, and I've sewn the dart as well. Now this is a wooden clapper. My dad made it for me a couple of years ago, and it is really good for pressing seams. So if you put your steam over the dart or the seam that you need to press, and then you just push down with that wood, because you're not putting the iron on the material and then scorching it, the pressure is placed with the wood. So you could just use a random piece of wood, but my dad made me this. My ironing board is not the sturdiest, as you can see it's wobbling around everywhere, but it does do the job. Next up I'm constructing the pockets, and I'm just going to be using some tailor's chalk just to mark the wrong side of the fabric, because it's quite hard to tell on this which is the right side and which is the wrong side, so it's just so I keep everything all the same. So there's more pressing and steaming, and I have done some basting stitches which go around the curve, which helps it to pull in so you can get a nice curve on the bottom of the pocket. So here you'll see that the main body of the coat has been pinned, so you've got the front to the back, same as I did in the muslin, and so it's pinned here, and then you're going to make that long dart and seam and just sew that all together, which is then forming the collar. Once you've done that, you then do exactly the same process again with the facing, and then the facing then gets attached to the main body of the coat. This is what the lapel now looks like, and it needs lots of steam to get that seam laid nice and flat. So the clapper and the wobbly ironing board makes an appearance yet again. So it needs lots of steam and lots of pressure just to get that flat. Next up is sleeve construction. So I have a small dart here in the side of the sleeve, and then I need to do gathering stitches for the sleeve head. So I'm just putting that through, and then the sleeve gets sewn together before then being turned right sides out and then set into the main body of the coat. The sleeve almost looks like it's in back to front. It's got all this, the gathering here, and it's too bulky, so I have only basted it in, so I'm going to unpick it and try again. Just like flat at the back, and I think that's where the E should be. Also, I'm not sure if I need one of these, so it's still dropping down, even though I took an inch out of the shoulder, so I do have some shoulder pads. I'm just trying to eye it up. That sits a bit better. I just being a bit lazy to do the sleeve head and bulk it out. So both sleeves are basted in. I haven't sewn them in properly. A bit creased, that just needs a press. And I think it's okay. I'm setting this up as to cut lining out. So this is the back piece here, and I've got some silk fabric, a silk panel, and that has folded over. So I've moved the back portion away by about just over an inch or so, inch and a half down here, so that the back lining piece is going to be wider, because obviously I need to put a pleat in the back to allow for movement. Now this over here is the front piece, and then I've actually laid the facing on the top. So what I'm going to do is trace just this piece here, because I don't need to cut out the lining for the full size of the front piece, because the facing's in the way. So I need to basically cut off where the facing would be from the front piece. So I think I will get some tracing paper out and just trace that, and then cut that out of the silk, and obviously cut two of those and sew them together, and then hopefully, but I'm looking at the fabric now thinking, do I have enough for the sleeve lining as well? It does go off the table, so I'm hoping I do have enough silk for that, and I may just need to cut that on the cross grain. Hopefully that won't affect the way it hangs or anything like that. Awkward camera angle. I can't figure out how to sew on the lining to the coat with the facing, so I've laid it out the way I want it to be, the finished look, and then I'm going to try and work out and maybe go in from the bottom from the hem to pin it, sew it, because it has to be sort of sewn, turned inside out, and then it's the right way around, but I can't figure it out in my head because the instructions don't include a lining, because so I've added this on and I'm just trying to figure this out. So I will get back to you and see if I can figure it out. So this is the inside of the coat, and I have now attached the lining, and because it has this yoke and the pattern isn't designed for a lining, I got a bit confused about how to attach the lining when it came to the sleeves, because the yoke was already sewn in, and the top half of the sleeve I had nothing to stitch it to. So I went up on the inside between the lining and the outer fabric and just whizzed it through my machine. It's not great, but it does the job. So my next stage is the cuffs. I'm just trying to show you. I have pinned one. So I've tried it on and I've pinned it, and I just need to go in now and attach the lining. So because the sleeve is already attached, I can't go in between to get on the inside. So what I'm doing is I have folded over the seam allowance of the lining, and then I'm going to stitch it by hand and catch stitch just around, and obviously leave a gap because I don't want the lining to hang out below the sleeve once it's done, and then hand stitch catch stitches of the lining to the cuff, and I need to do that on both, and then hem, another press, and then the button. So I'm on the final stretch. I have procrastinated a week. This is the final bit. I'm getting there, nearly done. This one looks fine. This one, the lining is hanging below the cuff, so I had to unpick it, cut some off, and then redo the cuff. I decided that I would need to add shoulder pads to this, so I'm just making some covers for the actual pads, and I didn't have any lining fabric left over, so I'm just using the same wool coating just to draw around the shoulder pad with a seam allowance, and then I'm going to cut that out. I'm turning it inside out, and I've just left a small opening which I then just fold inside each other and just stitch that hem over. The last little bit I need to do before the press is the buttonhole. It's sewn horizontally and I decided to do it by hand. I don't know why I did. I could have just put it through my machine, but I thought I'd just do it by hand just to reinforce that. So here is the finished jacket. So it's a one button jacket. It's quite an oversized coat. I think it probably needs a professional press, so I might take it to, I think you can get it done at the dry cleaners. So I've pressed it as much as I can. I'm overall quite pleased with it. It's quite roomy, so it will fit a nice big chunky jumper. The collar will stand up because I think I added the horsehair canvas. It adds that stiffness to the lapels, so it will just keep my neck nice and warm. And it's just an oversized blazer. I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. And thank you for sticking with me for this far. If you have made it to the end, nearly at the end of the video. This did take me quite a few days to make, so I just wanted to document step by step how I made the coat, just so anyone, if you do sew out there, that you don't get disheartened thinking that people can just make a coat in a day, because if you want to make the coat well, you do have fitting issues, and you've seen that my progress as I go along. So I just wanted this video really to encourage you to stick with it, and it really is worth doing that test garment first.